just before we crack on with the UCT business, this is one of the Cummins-Beaumont's books. It's Britain, the Key to World History. And there's an appendix at the back, which is about the descent of the Trojans in around about 1100 BC, led by Brutus. And there's also an appendix which basically it proves beyond doubt, with topological evidence that I was talking about in the first half, that Jerusalem and the Holy Lands were on these shores in biblical times. And it is amazing, it's truly amazing. You can get everything except the appendixes in this book at selfrealization.com in the Our Stories section. But I highly recommend buying these books on Lulu directly from the family's publisher, because these are some of the most suppressed works of all time. And they're the 4 books. I got to tell you, this is another one, The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain. Again, going into detail about a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, but going further, deeper into the history of these lands. And if you buy these books, you'll do an enormous benefit for yourselves and for everybody else who you talk about, because this is the most infectious information that I've ever come across. Because all of a sudden, I understand why there are so many of us on these islands now, and yet the vast majority are sitting there fucked out of their heads on statins or alcohol or some other synthetic drug that doesn't come from the ground. It comes from the arms, the tentacles of the mass murderers, the genocidal maniacs who've been running things for so long through deception and control of everything. And we have, I know that we're already on the same page, because we know that the common man, despite the ancient laws of these lands, which were the freest lands in this part of the hemisphere, at least during the last 12,000 years, where people came to live freely, where babies were born and they had a right to live and exist above everything else, that no one could take from a man and his family, the land that they were living on and all of the things above and below it. And they're taking the homes of good, decent, honest people who've obeyed the rules their whole lives because they thought that was the way they were going to get on. That was the way they were going to advance themselves in life. And it never happened. I go out my front door and I see everywhere I go, miserable people, pissed off people, people who fucking hate every single day. It's a drudgery. They can't stand it. They need... Breathe. My daughter, last week, saw a little boy on a bouncy castle jumping up and down on little boys' and little girls' chests, making them cry and laughing. She went over, and she's 3.5, and she's never experienced anything like this, but we've discussed what to do if she ever sees a bully, or if she's ever bullied. So she goes over to him and says, "No, don't do that. That's wrong. Stop it." And he got up with it, because I was watching it. And I was about to intervene, but I couldn't, because this is a critical moment in her life. She'll never fear bullies because she's standing up to a bully. I had to let it go. And she basically said, "You don't do that." He got up with a smile on his face, evil intent. And he went to push her, and she grabbed his arms and pushed him back and said, "No, don't do that to me. You shouldn't be here." Now, I didn't put her up to that. I just told her about situations where she might have to deal with bullies. This is a little girl who's never had a single letter from the state with her name on it. This is a little girl who, she gets up in the morning and she's 100 miles an hour. And from the moment I looked into her eyes, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. And the first moment of, I can only describe it as a telepathic empathy when I'm holding her in my arms. She's a few weeks old and I'm smiling and I look down and I say, "What is it you came here to do, little girl? What is it?" And immediately in my head, I heard the voice that I hadn't heard. This was the first time I heard it. "I'm here to help, Daddy." And I tell you that after the story about her intervening with a bully. He wasn't bullying her. She prevented that. But she didn't want to see other people getting bullied. The state is the biggest bully of the lot. There is no legitimate government except self-government. None. It's a myth. There is no good government. Oh, let's make it really small with the same powers to really fuck your life up, to punish you if you don't do what you're told, no matter which State Department it is. There are people getting their kids taken from them in this country now for expressing an opinion, for having the wrong opinion, for saying that maybe, maybe feminism has had a detrimental effect on the world, as well as a positive effect in certain respects. Maybe we've got a situation here where generally men, it's okay to demean them socially. It's okay to insult men. But if you even suggest that a feminist woman has an opinion that might be questionable, you're castigated, you're ostracized. Now, I'm saying we're not all the same. We're all unique with all the same rights and all the same abilities. We all have it within us to create a world that is so much better than it is now, because it has been in the past. That's why they don't want us to know this history we've been talking about. They don't want us to know that whoever came to these lands was free, as long as they demonstrated that they weren't gonna wrong people who already lived here, who already had an open spirit, that you know what, there is good in the world. There is good. But there's very little good among the elite, the moneyed aristocracy who've controlled everything, at least since the Battle of Waterloo, 1815, like I was talking about earlier. Now, the fact is, we do not need to go to them and ask for remedy. In fact, having attempted to do that, more out of desperation than any other means, to try and prevent my families having their homes stolen from them for the second time in my life. The first time, I was 18 in the middle of my O-levels, and my mother was having a nervous breakdown. My dad took her away. I moved house on my own. It was an eviction. The agreement was they wouldn't send bailiffs because I was doing it, and we wouldn't resist it. Now, I did this thinking it wouldn't have any kind of dramatic effect. I could handle it. It was shit enough moving, but we'd move on. We'd get on with it. And then I'm standing on the grass. The removal men have gone. And I've been in my A-level history exam, and I've written a little note about the day I've had and explained why I hadn't done any revision whatsoever on the European Renaissance. And could he take pity on me because I needed at least a pass to get out of Newcastle and go to university? Because that's what I wanted to do at the time. Now, the fact is, I passed it. But when I'm standing there wondering whether I'll pass on the grass and looking at the house for the last time, thinking about all my formative years, all the things that happened there, all the memories that I'll always have about that place and my family will, and that we were being chucked out on our asses on the street with not a pot to piss in for one simple reason. A bank said me dad owed money. Well, I wanted to know if he really did owe the money. And I'm standing on the grass wondering if he really did owe the money. I really wanted to know, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. And then at that moment, an E-type Jag pulled up onto the grass, half onto the grass, the wheels. He was a few feet away from me, and I knew instinctively it was the official receiver. I'd never met him, didn't know what he looked like, and it was him. And I turned round, and he looked at me, he wound his electric window down, and that was quite highfalutin for the time, 1987. And basically wound it down, and a smug face in a suit sitting there. And he said, "Is your dad in?" I didn't say anything. And he said, "Tell your dad that if everything's not out by the end of the day, then we're just going to sell it." And I looked at him without blinking, and I said, "If you're not gone in 10 seconds, I won't be responsible for my actions." And I just stared at him. And he tried a little smirk and a laugh, and then he got a little bit scared. But I was just a kid. He was the official receiver. He'd already tried to frame me dad for fraud, being rapped on the knuckles by a judge who said, "If you ever do this against this bloke, I'll make sure that you're struck off." But he didn't get struck off. And he was lying about me dad just so he could take the house. And they took it anyway, even though it was proven that he was lying in the High Court. So I looked at him and I started counting. And by the time I got to 3, fucked off. And, well, I didn't need a round of applause, but, I tell you what, at that moment, I don't think I've ever felt so lost at sea, so emotionally wrought without a shoulder to cry on. And then I thought, no, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm going to get on with it. And that's what I did. But what has driven me to the point where I would not even contemplate being a father of a child until I at least had a handle on how I might spend the rest of my life doing what I could every day just to do my best to make the world a better place for me daughter and my family and my community and everybody else on the earth, to live in a better condition than we have been subjected to. And we have been subjected to it, but it's through our acquiescence to the system. There's a mind program, there's a meme which is being put out in the so-called independent media, which teaches people not to resist. What you resist will persist, they say. Bullshit. What you resist will eventually stop, or you'll die trying to stop it. One way or the other. What's the difference between right and wrong? Just doing what you know in your heart is right in every moment, and damn the consequences. That's knowing the difference. It's not thinking, oh my God, if I dive in the middle of this road to push that child out the way of a car, then I'm going to risk, oh, she's dead. It's saying every single day that you can make this world a better place, and you start in your own life by making a decision to self-determine, because self-determination is the only way. And if I can find me little dongler, whatever it is, where is it? We'll start going through the UCT stuff. So that's the current logo. Do you like it? It's the flower of life, yes. Okay, this section is called The Rise of Universal Community Trust. I declared the founding of the Universal Community Mission and served the declaration on Elizabeth Windsor near Rothschild on around about the 28th of March 2009. This was after I'd sent a previous declaration in September 2008, which at the time was called a Notice of Understanding and an Intent and Claim of Right. And at the time, myself and a guy called Amit Zala, who was one of the three of us who did the original Freeman Conference in November 2008, within a few days of each other, we sent this declaration to the Queen, believing that other people had already done it because we'd heard that they had on certain forums but had no proof. We later found out that while at the same time John Harris was sending affidavits to the Queen in lawful rebellion, as others were, we were the first to send anything of this type to the Queen. Amit got a letter from the Queen's personal secretary, private secretary, Sonia Bernicia, I think, and it was acknowledging the safe receipt of his letter, even though it was a notice with a declaration in it, revoking consent to be governed. And she said that the Queen read it with great interest, or words to those effect, and has passed it on to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Well, there was the first clue. I got nothing, but he got that. And virtually nobody else got that, but a couple of people I know did later on get something like that. So we knew at least this was having some kind of effect, and they couldn't decide which way they were going to go. Were they going to ignore it, or were they going to send a letter acknowledging it? It was a difficult one. So it went the other way sometimes. Now, when I made the declaration the following year in the March, it was an amendment of that document. But as of the date that I served the original document, that was the date I revoked my consent to be governed and took control of the name on the birth certificate, which I've used as a trade name since then, to interact with their system whenever I've had to, which is really of late, or the last couple of years, only been in legal proceedings. I'm established in the borough where I live as having diplomatic missionary status, even though they haven't acknowledged the diplomatic part. It's the deputy superintendent registrar, I believe it is, or one of the registrars in the borough has acknowledged my status as some form of missionary, and the place where I live is now accepted as a non-registered mission. And that is how they don't send me any bills for council tax, even though they know I live there. I've never paid any council tax at that address. I haven't paid any income tax or sent a tax return since I think it's around about 2003 now. And as I've been saying, we didn't register. She's not going to school, and neither will any of our other children. But I can't expect you to even consider whether or not you could apply these things in your life, if at all, without offering some kind of idea about what we might create from the ground up in every community. Because what we've seen, what Loz has seen, what Mike Levelman has seen, and Mike and many others in this room, I'm sure, we've been into the courts over mortgages. We've demonstrated with case law, statute law, and with numerous authorities and sources of legal opinion that there is no doubt whatsoever that since 1989, there is virtually no valid mortgage in existence. None. And yet they're kicking thousands of people out onto the streets because they've got, or they think they've got no alternative. Well, it's going to take the rise of the people in every community. It's not going to take people waiting for someone else to do it for them or expecting there to be a replacement welfare state. That will never happen. If universal community trust comes into fruition the way we're looking to manifest it, and it is manifesting, we took the decision to open up to potential nation builders on these shores the opportunity to found a sovereign community trust as part of my universal community mission to bring about an environment which is conducive to not only our own self-realization, but the self-realization of our children in freedom, peace, and abundance. And this isn't some hippie dream. This is the very opposite of that. This is actually taking responsibility, not to seek a profit from what we do, but to seek to do what beats in our hearts, what motivates us to express ourselves to everybody else, because we've all got a unique contribution. But what it's going to take is a group of people coming together and say, right, are we all agreed on these basic principles? And that's effectively what UCT is. It's a community of sovereign indigenous nations. And we formed the Universal Community of Self-Realization, which was the original Sovereign Community Trust. Michael is one of the founding trustees of that trust, and there are 6 others. And the formation of the UCT is a vehicle for the formation of sovereign community trusts, and more UCTs being appointed. That happened in, I think it was April 2011, but I haven't checked the documents because I really was, I was putting the finishing touches to this just before I was getting in the car, because I really don't have very much time to get these kind of things together. And that's why I have to forgive the very Spartan backgrounds to the presentation. Okay, so, what's wrong with wrong way. Oh, God. The ratification of the Treaty of Universal Community Trust took place on the summer solstice 2012 by 26 newly formed community trusts. We got another couple of trustees in here sitting in the front row, Mike and Paul. And what they will testify is that while it's certainly not easy getting out of the system, you may have to go through a period where you have 1 foot in and 1 foot out, but there comes a time where you have to make a decision. And that decision is, well, do I really want to give the Crown and its agents and the UN and all of the other alphabet agencies the opportunity to hand freely a legal weakness in our arguments about being sovereign? Because until you revoke your consent to be governed formally, until you no longer take any benefits and privileges from the state, and how difficult is that? But until you get to that point, until you free yourself from the trap, and it is a trap, until you start every day, bit by bit, to rebuild the communities that have been destroyed all over these lands, it's not going to get any better. And it doesn't, because I'm testifying this from my own life. What I've seen is, I got rid of all the problems I had. 7 threats of legal proceedings by Crown agencies in the early summer, late spring of 2008. Within a year, every single one of them was gone, and I was not a taxpayer anymore. Every single one of them was gone because I revoked my consent to be governed, and I told them, I am not going to give a single penny to a state that is responsible for the killing of innocent children, women and men in foreign shores. I'm not going to do it. And I resent every penny that I have to pay in VAT and all the other hidden taxes, but there's virtually nothing you can do about that. Virtually. If you can, yes, but again, you're going into their system seeking the remedy, you see. I know, you see, wherever you turn, there's one of those. Oh, well, but you know what? You could be better off if you just got child benefit. And most people capitulate because they're hard up. Most people are hard up. My oldest friend recently resigned from the bar. I think that deserves a round of applause. He's I was joking. No, I'm not going to play a violin for the barristers and lawyers. But I am going to say this. I've known him since we were 10. And he is the only barrister who was qualified in living memory, although he doesn't brag about it, who didn't go to university and do a law degree. He was spotted as an amazing advocate in the county court by a barrister who said, look, I'll make some calls. You really got to do this. You're wasted. And he went and he became one of the most successful criminal barristers, only defending people, only really serious crimes, and refusing to be part of the business of law, refusing to join any club or secret society when he was just not even turning his back on the opportunities even to avoid it, refusing to go and live in London to make millions. He's resigning because he said, Michael, the whole system is fucked. Criminal law is dead, meaning there is no justice without money anymore, if there ever was. And this same man 3 years ago said, please stop telling me all this shit. And I had to for 18 months because he wouldn't see me. But when we saw each other last, he said, it's amazing when we have these conversations because I laugh so much, but I'm getting more and more depressed because I can't do this. I can't do it. And it's been a waste of time. He said, only the lords in their castles are not suffering. Well, ain't that the truth? And there's increasingly fewer of those since they broke constitutional law, if indeed it does exist. They broke constitutional law with the House of Lords Act 1999 by illegally, unconstitutionally removing the hereditary peerage, having already brainwashed us to believe through the so-called Labour movement and the Labour Party and the Rothschilds behind them and the Fabians that, oh, no, we have to just dismiss all of that. We can't, we shouldn't buck the system. The system will provide the remedy in the end. You know, it will be much better when Tony Blair gets in. And it wasn't, it was much worse. And it's been getting worse ever since. And I don't know anybody who's had any kind of pay rise that wasn't lower than the rate of inflation over the past 5 years, and yet the banks are still getting bailed out. People are still getting kicked out of their homes for void mortgages. We can stop this. We don't need a violent revolution. We need organized, spontaneous resistance in every single community. Just because the will is there. Never have I ever felt like this during this incarnation at least. I've never felt like we have the opportunity that we have now. That I can come to you completely unprepared to say all of these things, and yet it's pouring out of my heart because I feel this so strongly. Now is the time that people need to rise up. There's no time to spare. It's not that they're going to thwart us. It's not that they're going to destroy us. It's that they're already doing it. We got to stop it. No more vaccines, no more poisons in the water, no more poisoning the air supply, no more money aristocracy control of absolutely everything, no more the local council getting you arrested for not paying unlawful property taxes, no more social services coming in and taking your kids off you because you had a row with your wife and you might have said something that you regret. No more genocide on foreign shores. No more institutionalized frauds. Once we know about these things, once we go and we look for ourselves, because don't take my word for it if you haven't already, and I'm sure many of you already have. I'm talking to a group of people who are already on the same wavelength, otherwise I would not be holding the room. The fact is, I cannot go on every single day thinking, why are they making everything so shit and it's getting worse? I can't do it. without wanting to go round and just gently shake everybody awake. Just shake them awake. Look.
Don't do it gently then.
Yeah.
My daughter, again, you see, I've learned so much. I'm sure all parents in the room will say that the greatest learning experience of all is when you have children, because it changes everything immediately, and it really does. And you can't be told it if you haven't got children. You can't be told it, but it does, and it should. Because from that day, I cannot look forward 25 years from now, sitting in what is ostensibly a grey, prison-like block of flats in the dystopian vision dreamt up by the sick fucks like Huxley. I can't be sitting in that place with my daughter, having no freedom to go anywhere, no freedom to do anything, having to do what she's told, even though at the very beginning we really try to do it right and keep her out of all that bullshit. I can't just say, right, there you go, Serenity. It's up to you and your generation. I've got to spend every day of my life trying to make this come about, because this isn't something that I made up. It isn't even something that the trustees collectively of UCT made up. This is something based on all of our collective researches about what really constitutes natural law and natural rights and real equity, because the real remedy is never in law. The law can tell you to do a crime and it's all right because of statute black magic. Equity will not allow a statute to do that. And what we try to do is to devise a system of equity which isn't a law form, even though it's an adaptation of the ancient Mamertine laws, as you'll see. So just to go through the last bit, on the solstice of the following year, a year after we signed the treaty, we formed the UCT depository. And the UCT depository is a potential replacement for the criminal financial system, but we'll come back to that later. When the treaty was served on the Foreign and Commonwealth Office on around about the 16th of August 2012, we got no acknowledgement whatsoever. Nothing. They let it go. So on around about the 28th of March, the Queen got served the treaty along with a memorandum of understanding by and between UCT and her government. And a memorandum of understanding under the law of nations and various international laws and conventions is exactly what you have the right to issue if 6 months pass, having given notice to another nation of your intentions to do things, and if they do not lodge any kind of legal objection or formal objection after 6 months, you can issue a memorandum of understanding on the same basis, which is exactly what we did on that day. We've had no acknowledgement from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. We've had no acknowledgement from the Queen or a private secretary. And what that means is that the Crown have not formally lodged any legal objection because, they don't say this, but because there is no possibility of a legal objection to what we've done, because under the law of treaties, that's all you need to go to understand the power of treaties, the law of treaties. And it's, again, it's in the, this would be in this, in the, self-determination on the link, but the, what's the section of all the UCT stuff on the website, Mark? Can you remember?
On the UCT? Well,
It's the autonomous section on selfrealization.com. All these documents, the documents that you can use to become a beneficiary of an existing sovereign community trust within UCT, and the documents that you can use to create a sovereign community trust under the UC Treaty are all on there. But we're going to go through some of the sections because we don't have time to go through all 23 minutes of it. There we go. Okay, Treaty of Universal Community Trust. Proclamation of independence, sovereignty and jurisdiction. Let it be known by all concerned, affected and interested parties that the independence and sovereignty of the communities of indigenous free peoples who ratify this treaty is hereby proclaimed, declared and affirmed without equivocation, and is vested solely in the men and women of those communities, both individually and collectively, notwithstanding the fact that their representatives may be authorized by each to act in a sovereign capacity on their collective behalf in strictly limited sets of circumstances, such as those mankind currently finds itself in, for the purposes of achieving the inter-community consensus required to establish a supreme jurisdiction under the guiding principles of natural law, supplemented and interpreted in this Treaty of Universal Community Trust with a view to peacefully bringing about the following aims and objectives: an end to all crimes against mankind and the earth that are currently being perpetrated by governments, whether elected or not, corporations, organisations, individuals, and legal entities of all natures and descriptions. 2. The dismantling of all industries which, by developing, manufacturing, and exploiting for profit any substance, product, or byproduct, cause actual damage, harm, injury, or loss to mankind and all the earth. 3. The deconstruction of unsustainable fiscal systems that would facilitate one man to have and one man to have not, including, without limitation, the abolition of usury in all its forms and the demonopolization of land rights, international borders, mediums of exchange, trading platforms, and the means of communicating, publishing, and distributing information. 4. The nullifying, settlement, and/or discharge of all outstanding or allegedly owed debts, obligations, and liabilities with a view to replacing unaccountable, unsustainable, and inequitable usury-based financial systems with localized and autonomous permanent credit facilities or depositories in every community that stands under the jurisdiction of Universal Community Trust. 5. The eradication of all forms of artificial scarcity and its effects, including homelessness, famine, and disease, by and through the facilitation of a naturally abundant, peaceful, free, and harmonious environment for mankind to dwell, and the distribution of organic materials, agricultural produce, seeds, and proven natural health remedies. 6. The dissolution of mankind's dependence upon fossil fuel industries for the production of energy, including without limitation coal seam gas mining, fracking, it's not in there but it's going to be, coal-fired power stations and oil drilling, as well as the cessation of all toxic pollution of the biosphere of the earth in any detrimental form whatsoever, whether it be gaseous, liquid, solid, or radioactive, and the closure and cleanup of all unsafe nuclear power facilities. 7. The rapid development, manufacture, distribution, and implementation of new and existing free and clean energy technologies in every community upon the earth under Universal Community Trust. 8. A ceasefire in all wars, the repatriation of all armed services personnel following the repudiation of all unlawful allegiances and the setting aside of all oaths made in the service of private interests to the detriment of mankind, and the unequivocal commitment of the parties to this treaty to recall and withdraw any and all beneficiaries of Universal Community Trust from every armed conflict at the earliest opportunity. 9. The establishment of cooperative trade networks in and between all communities with a view to promoting the localisation of trade, self-sufficiency, mutual cooperation, and the eventual replacement of money with unconditional pledges of sweat equity, which shall form the basis of the permanent credit of every beneficiary of Universal Community Trust. 10. An agreement that privately issued promissory notes made payable to bearer on demand by any grantor, trustee, or beneficiary of Universal Community Trust may be used for the purposes of settling any valid financial obligation or to create credits in their account held at the community's depository, the balance of which will be transferable to any account in another jurisdiction, provided those credits are not used for any purpose that is detrimental to mankind and or the earth. 11. The nullifying of any and all judicial proceedings and convictions for victimless crimes, as well as the positive law which legalised such unlawful proceedings, and the prohibition and prevention of any man being charged with future crimes. 12. The facilitation of the re-emergence of the universal bond of common unity between the free indigenous peoples of the earth in order to achieve these aims and objectives in the most peaceful, amicable, and equitable manners. In acknowledgement of the ancient usages, rights, and customs of the free indigenous peoples of the earth, the parties to this treaty agree as follows. There are 3 foundations of every community: common unity, peaceful possession, and equity for all. There are 3 foundations of equity: protection, correction, and natural justice. There are 3 protections and securities for every member of the community: of life and the body, of the place we make a home, and of our natural rights. There are 3 energies of equitable resolutions: a learned arbitrator or jury, a faithful witness, and a conscientious verdict. There are 3 mandatory qualifications of every jury or arbitrator of a dispute or complaint: a full and complete knowledge of the facts of the matter, the customs of the community, and the tendencies and consequences of the times. There are 3 things which every arbitrator should constantly study: natural truth, conscientious forgiveness, and the energetic diktats of knowledge. There are 3 indispensabilities of every community: the sovereignty of the self-governed, the voice of the people being heard without prejudice, and the consistent and unbiased administration of equity. There are 3 universally binding actions that should require the verdict of a supreme grand jury of 13 sovereign representatives to effect in any nation: the deposition of a de facto government or acting sovereign paramount, the banishment of criminal religious institutions and monarchies, and the equitable reclamation of the lands, resources, and properties unlawfully held by such parties, and the suspension or repudiation of laws and instruments that do not benefit mankind and or cause damage to the earth. There are 3 unalienable birthrights: the right to peaceful possession of a parcel of land fit for the purposes of building a home, growing food, and raising a family, with unrestricted access to clean, unpolluted water, as well as the minerals below and the airspace above it. The right to use all necessary and reasonable defences to protect the body, family, and property from theft, fraud, damage, harm, and loss, and the right to self-determination under natural law. There are 3 guarantees of every community which has the voluntary consent of its sovereign people: security for life and limb, security for property held in peaceful possession without malfeasance, theft, or fraud, and security of the right to self-determination. There are 3 things the safety of which depends on that of the others: the sovereignty of the people, the integrity and fairness of a nation's domestic and foreign policies, and the consistent and unbiased administration of equity. There are 3 things free to everybody upon the earth, the refusal of which no law can justify: food from an abundant field, forest, or orchard, water from spring, river, tap, or well, for any individual or family in dire need of sustenance, firing from a decayed tree or fence, and peaceful possession of a dwelling or land not in fair use or proven to be rightfully held following due public notice of a claim by a landless or homeless individual or family or community. There are 3 thieves who should not suffer proceedings against them: any individual compelled under the force of another, any child under 16 years, and anybody who is suffering from any form of generally accepted mental illness, incapacity, or disease. There are 3 rightful applications of equity: prevention of actual suffering, harm, injury, damage, and loss, compensation and or restitution for all injured parties, and assurance of equitable resolutions, peaceful civil proceedings, and the reconciliation of the accused with their accusers. There are 3 sacred conventions of universal community trust: a convention of families assembled for the purposes of founding a community, a convention of arbitrators for the purposes of administering equity, and a convention of sovereign community trusts assembled for the purposes of establishing independence, accession, and jurisdiction. It is self-evident that freedom cannot coexist with inequality of rights and restrictions, taxation of labour or sweat equity, and the restriction of our freedom to come and go as we please. Any sovereign nation of free indigenous people is necessarily ruined by inordinate privileges for the few, corruption of justice, and a general national apathy to injustices which have become all too prevalent in the so-called modern societies. Long-lasting peace under natural law cannot be established without an end to all wars between nations, the demonopolization of land rights and natural resources, and the repudiation of all laws that were made by mankind to its own detriment and that of the earth. Let it be known by all that no law can unman a man or uncall a calling. There are 3 things which promote common unity: empathy, respect, and unconditional love for our fellow man. There are 3 things which strengthen common unity: effective protection and security for every man and his property, just correction wherever it is required, and forgiveness derived from an equitable cause. There are 3 things that destroy common unity: cruel and unjust punishments, forgiveness derived from blind respect and partiality, and false judgment where no man can obtain natural protection. There are 3 pillars of every community: sovereignty of the individual and the nation, the voice of the people, and equitable resolutions of disputes and complaints. There are 3 things which ought to belong to each of these 3 pillars: equity to all, protection and defense to all, and open source information for the instruction, knowledge, and records of all. There are 3 elements of equitable resolutions: right knowledge, natural right, and conscientious rectitude. Okay, that's it for the sections from the treaty. So I'll have a little drink of water. There are other sections which echo everything that you've just heard. It's everything that we do under UCT is under natural law. No man or woman or child is bereft of the rights, the unalienable rights, the birthrights that any other under UCT has. When I say under UCT, all I mean is if you live under the jurisdiction of UCT, meaning you live in accordance with the terms of the treaty and you're outside of their system, or you've given the intent to do that and you're in the process of revoking your consent to that system and coming over into this one. But as it's been very wisely pointed out earlier by Neil, we need things to get going on the ground. And again, I just want to commend what's been achieved at this venue, because it's very obvious from the energy present in the room that whatever the effect of what's been said, you're going to go away and consider it. And perhaps, just perhaps, if even one of you decides, like several people in the room, including Oliver, who I didn't mention before, have already done, you take the first big step to actually putting into practice a desire never to comply with the system of tyranny ever again. But this won't happen overnight. It might take 100 years. So in these early days, our job is not being evangelical about things, though I do tend to get quite impassioned now and again, as you might have noticed. The fact is, this is what I've known in my heart. I once believed I would create a work of fiction that might inspire people to create something like this. So I decided to stop working in fictions and attempt to just envisage what I already know in my heart, even though I can't cognitively express it to you now. I already know in my heart from my previous experience, the previous experiences of my soul on this planet, and I'm sure everybody else in this room and even on this earth. We are bringing with us memories of what things were like and the descent that we've been through. Virtually everybody on these islands is suffering from some form of post-traumatic stress disorder because of whatever the tyranny was that they've experienced. Now, there are some of us who stand up to that and give reasonable force back in whatever form is necessary. And some of those people are never bothered again. And some of them end up getting thrown in prison. And worse, some of them end up dead. The fact is, we don't need to go to their system with a begging bowl anymore. We just need to imagine what it would be like living under natural law, when there is there's an organized community which is based on the common unity that's held between all within it, to prevent injustices from happening, to prevent people from getting thrown out of their homes, and to take back all of the pieces of land that have been stolen from us by the crown. Because under international law and the law of nations, it is unlawful for the usurpers, pirates, and genocidal maniacs who've held these lands in the same bloodline, despite the fact that they've hidden behind the House of Rothschild and the church for the best part of a millennia. It's that these people are still holding the reins of the ill-gotten gains of conquest is unlawful under their rules, under UN conventions, under the Kellogg Pact of 1922 and 1926. In other words, we now have the proof that these lands were taken by conquest and the indigenous peoples were wiped out, but not just here, virtually everywhere. Because it happened here in this part of the world, at least in this part of the Northern Hemisphere. It happened here last. That's why, before they invented the idea of America, the alleged land of the free, the land of the free was always known as being these lands. Always. Because this was the only community of nations which, when they went to foreign fields and conquered them, like when they sacked Rome in the 4th century, it was Brennus who did it, a British king, the son of Malmatus. When that happened, everybody knew that this was the land of the free, because these peoples went to other lands and set the slaves free. They didn't take them into captivity. All the rest of the nations were slave drivers. and conquerors. They wanted to take by force of violence whatever anybody had that wasn't theirs. And they did. But it happened here last. And I think that's why on these small islands there are so many people. Because you know what? It isn't going to take taking up arms, getting an army together, getting weapons together. It isn't. It's going to take putting a stop to the lawyers who are taking part in the fraud doing business, making insurance claims against their bond for gross negligence in giving you false information, which was encouraging you to enter into an unlawful agreement, which is a purported mortgage. And it's also going to happen by stopping the courts issuing verdicts, by shutting them down, by locking their doors, or by forming human chains around the courts to stop anybody going in and out. It's going to stop if we use our ingenuity and we decide that it's just not going to happen where we live anymore. It's not. It's that the councils have got to be divested of their power. If we held a local meeting and declared the council null and void and slapped liens on them for acquiescing to the spraying of the chemicals in the air, the poisoning of the water supply, and all of the rest of the bullshit that they've imposed upon us for profit. It's going to stop when we all decide that we're not going to just do something because everybody else do it or most people do something else. And I'm not saying that that's going to be easy. It's going to be the hardest task that anybody takes on. But I cannot imagine in 25 years saying to my daughter that I did not do everything I could to try and bring about that kind of condition where we live. Because it's been like that before. I know it in my heart.